Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. My guest today is David Annandale, and we're talking about writing tie-in fiction. Now, David Annandale, if you don't know his work, is hands down the fastest writer I know. And he writes, his quote unquote his own books, like books that he owns a copyright to that aren't tie-in fiction. But he's done like some spy thrillers that we talk really briefly about, I think, with Jen Blaylock as his sort of titular spy character. He has a horror novel, which is outstanding, called Gethsemane Hall. That book is, kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but it's really outstanding. Really, really recommend Gethsemane Hall. Go get a copy of that book before it's sold out, because it's phenomenal. Of course, he's written, as we talk about in this interview, for the Black Library, Warhammer 40,000, tabletop game and book series. I can't even tell you how many books he's done. Like, every time I turn around, this guy finishes and publishes a new book. Like, we did this interview a few years ago. I forget how many books he had at that time. He's got like 3 times as many books now. Like, it's only been a couple of years, and he's like literally doubled the amount of books that he has out in the world. And you know what? These are good books. So I haven't read all of David Annandale's stuff. I try to read pretty much everything I can by people before I interview them. Annandale, at this time I did the interview, I'd read most of the stuff he'd published, but he outpaced me like literally like the next week there was like 5 more books out. It's just ridiculous. And you know what? All the stuff I read, for the pace he's kept up, it's actually really good stuff. You'd think like going at that pace, it would not be great. But you know what? This guy can write, and really kind of interesting, weird things. Like, so for example, I'm not I don't know anything about Warhammer 40,000 other than like what I've read in his books. Like, I've never played the game, and so on. My friend was trying to get me into playing the game at one point, but 2 things happened. One is I was like, this game seems like it's going to be expensive to play because I'm going to collect toys, and once you start collecting one, you get another one. Where does it end? So I'm not saying don't play Warhammer. David Annandale wants you to play Warhammer, and it looked like a great game, to be frankly honest. It's just that I was like very reluctant to get into it because I was like, I could see this becoming an obsession. I don't know if I want to go down that road. And then also my friend died, and so that's the guy I was going to play Warhammer with, really. So anyway, a couple of reasons I didn't get into it personally, but I did start reading these books once Annandale started writing them, because initially I was just like, I'm kind of curious, and plus he's, friend, I want to support him. I really like these books, and the one I would particularly recommend is a book called The Damnation of Pythos. So Gethsemane Hall is a non-Warhammer book that I highly recommend. And The Damnation of Pythos is the Warhammer book that I most recommend, are the ones I read. Really interesting, book in many, many ways. It's pretty standalone. Like, I understood more or less everything that was going on, and I didn't, again, have the real background in Warhammer. But it also does a thing that Annandale's really good at doing this. He will often sneak in weird references and concepts from complex post-structuralist literary theory. So he's big into Deleuze and Guattari, and I'm literally reading Damnation of Pythos, this Warhammer tie-in fiction. He's got actual concepts from Deleuze and Guattari as plot points and plot devices, and it works fine. If you didn't know anything about Deleuze and Guattari and schizoanalysis and so on, if you don't know what that word means, you could read this book and not have a clue that he's sneaking all this stuff by you. But he is, really interesting stuff. So anyway, check it out. If you go to the show notes at jonathanball.com/11. So again, jonathanball.com/11. You can get links to all that stuff, learn more about Annandale. And there's also a video version of this, again, a Skype. This is one of the older interviews again. I'm kind of like putting out some of these older interviews before I kind of get into the newer ones. And that's a Skype call that we were on. So you can watch the video for that if you like. Or you can, of course, listen to this. Regardless, enjoy the interview with David Annandale. Welcome, David Annandale. Thanks so much for talking to me about tie-in fiction. So, which is something that I get asked a lot about. I don't know a whole lot about it myself, and you're the person I know, who is certainly the authority on it in my world, and has been really just killing it with book after book. There was one point I remember when we had about the same amount of books out, and then like a week later you had twice as many books. At least that's how it felt, So in the grim darkness of the far future, there's only war is the amazing, Warhammer tagline. And I was wondering if you could maybe just begin with talking a bit about what Warhammer 40,000 is and how you started writing Warhammer tie-in fiction.
Well, Warhammer 40,000 is a tabletop war game with where you players play as one of a number of different armies, whether they're the human Imperium side, so which involve primarily Space Marines, but also more non-enhanced humans as well. And then you have Eldar, which are futuristic elves. You have the Orcs, who have all kinds of tanks and laser beams that Tolkien's Orcs would have loved to have gotten their hands on. The Tyranids, which are these very alien hive intelligence monsters, chaos demons, and the like. And so the human Imperium, and then, of course, as the name suggests, it's set in the very distant future. Humanity, civilization has devolved into an absolutely dystopian galactic empire. So if it's a kind of worst case scenario of the future, and the environment combines war, Lovecraftian horrors, and all. It's this one-stop shopping of kind of sci-fi, horror, epic combat, all in one place. So that's the context of the game, and the fiction then tells the stories related to the figures. The way I got involved with writing for the Black Library was that they issued an open call for an anthology, which was Treacheries of the Space Marines, and they were looking for stories about one of four characters. At this point, I was really hoping to get into writing for them, so I put together a proposal for a story that became the Carrion Anthem. Sent that in. A few months later, I heard back from one of the editors, Christian Dunn, who liked my proposal, said, go ahead, write the story, which I did. They liked the story, said, send us more, and I followed that up with a pitch for the book that became The Death of Antagonists, and I was off to the races. So it's been enormous fun working very steadily for them ever since.
So does that seem like a typical approach to breaking into this sort of a tie-in fiction industry? Or have you noticed that that's what other people have done, or is this an atypical approach? Like how do you feel that experience compares to what normally happens?
I think it varies enormously. Depending on which end of the industry you're at. I think there's, as with any industry, there's going to be connections. So the editors getting in touch with writers they already know, is going to have some effect there. But there are publishers who will open things up, right? So Black Library doing that allowed me to get in. Since they were actively looking for new writers, and I know that they continue to do that. They used to have a period where there was an open window for anyone to send submissions in. They've had to, because of the sheer volume of of submissions now make them much more targeted. So there'll be periodically calls for particular projects where they will invite people to send in their pitches. Other publishers have things a little bit like this. Abaddon Books, I believe, once a year they have a somewhat more open pitch period, or people submit proposals for either universes that they're coming up with or for stories in Abaddon's existing universes. And some of that's less specifically tie-in fiction, but it is related. And yeah, as for some of the other tie-in markets, I really wouldn't know for sure.
And to what degree did the fact that you'd published books previously matter?
Well, for that, I guess you'd have to ask one of the editors. No. I don't know. I think it probably helped. I certainly, when I was putting my proposal together, I was able to present myself as a pro author. I already had 3 books to my name when I said, I want to write for you, and here's stuff I've already done. I've already written books with large-scale combat, so I know what I'm doing. At least that was how I put together my query letter. But I do know of some writers, some who have made sales to them who have not had that experience. A couple of years ago, when I was in Nottingham for the Black Library Weekender, there was a special session on the Friday for aspiring writers to talk to those of us who were writing for Black Library and to sort of workshop their stories, and then they were invited to submit pitches. And one of the fellows that I met there did make a sale. So, and as far as I know, that would have been his first professional sale. So, I think my track record probably didn't hurt, but I also know that it wasn't the only way to get in.
Okay, and so again, you've done, I guess by the time this first book came out, we were trying to figure out exactly the timeline, but you'd done at least 3 thrillers with the Jen Blaylock character, with Turnstone Books. You were in the process, I believe, of selling your horror novel, your first straight up horror novel, Gethsemane Hall, when you started doing the Black Library writing. That book was done, and it was kind of en route towards publication. So you'd had, like I say, 4 books as you're getting towards your first Black Library novel, right? Like your first actual book with them, as opposed to short fiction and so on. And one thing I'm kind of so you do your own writing, and you write for the Black Library. To what degree do you see that your work with the Black Library, as a sort of quote unquote, media tie-in writer, to what degree do you see that as, presenting different challenges or opportunities than the work that you would be doing, I guess, as an independent author, in a sense? I mean, every author is sort of independent, but if you know what I'm saying, like, you're not just doing one or the other, which I think is, sometimes the case, or at least historically people have thought about that being the case. You're very much, doing both. And even as you, I mean, just from it may look like you kind of had stopped doing your thing and gone to do Black Library work, but you are, I know, very much doing both. So I'm just wondering what challenges or it presents to do both, and why you are doing both as opposed to, say, just doing one.
Well, the challenge is, in some ways, I think the primary challenge is working in the original work. And I mean, there are a lot of tie-in fiction writers who do both. I'm certainly, I'm in no way an exception there. And the challenge is finding is juggling, and it's certainly one that I'm still working with. I am hoping to get some real headway on the follow-up to Gethsemane Hall done this summer. But the fact of the matter is, with tie-in work, you have a deadline. and they're firm, and you have to get the work in by deadline. So it takes priority, and which means that the original work has to fit in the margins of time to the extent that they exist at all, and that has been a challenge. I've written since I started working with the Black Library. I've written a few original short stories and done some outlining work on a couple of novels and done some preliminary chapters, but I haven't yet put out another original novel, and it's certainly not a problem that I resent having by any stretch. I love the work I'm doing with Black Library, and I consider myself extremely fortunate that this is the challenge that I'm having to work with. So that's I think the main issue is juggling it, finding the way of getting the other work out while meeting the expectations and the deadlines of the publisher for the tie-in fiction.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's certainly not a bad problem to have. So with so many writers, the problem is, getting their work done and getting their work out, around some other job that they're doing. I mean, you do have another job, but like in some ways, the problem getting this book out is I got to put these 10 books out. Like it's certainly not the worst problem to have.
No,
by any means at all.
No, it really is. It's one of the best problems one could possibly have as a writer. I think I really do. I'm very, very conscious of just how lucky I am to be at this stage. I mean, I look back at where I was in the 90s, where I felt like I couldn't get myself arrested as far as being a writer is concerned, and this is a much, much, much nicer place to be.
How does writing in a shared universe work? So this is not just a universe that you haven't created, but it's a universe that others are actively creating, as even you're adding to it and expanding it. So you're not only in this position where, in many respects, again, you're working in this existing field, but you're also working in there with other people, and there's a degree to which you're all in the same sandbox. And I'm curious to know, like, exactly how does that work? How is it different in a kind of functional, practical way, like in terms of things you would actually think about while writing? How is it different from when you're sort of in control of that sandbox? What are the sort of benefits of it? What are the drawbacks of it? How do you kind of negotiate that, and how is it different from your other writing?
Well, I guess there's going to be a collaborative aspect, even when it could be quite distant, or it could be quite tight. It depends on the nature of the project. You are aware, certainly, of the other writers working in the same area. Well, I should say it varies a lot. For instance, with the Horus Heresy, that line of Black Library books, which is it's set in the 31st millennium, and is the epic tale of the galactic civil war that sets the stage for all of the misery and horror 10,000 years down the road. So that is an actual series. Right, so that involves meetings with the editors, discussions of who's going to tell what story, what's happening in this story that's going to have an effect with this on this person's work. So people know what people are doing, and we all have our particular stories to be concentrating on. And that's where there's an actual series, right? So it involves a greater degree of communication. In other stories, there may be you're working with a character that somebody else has done something with, but they haven't really done it. They're not working on them now, so it may simply be enough to have a look at what somebody else has already done, and then you go and do your thing, falling within the canon of that established character. So it really varies enormously. It may be as simple as getting in touch with another writer and saying, "Hey, I'm planning on doing this. That's not going to interfere with something you're doing over there, is it?" In other cases, there may not be, there's just a little bit of background material that you get. I shouldn't say a little. There's often a lot of background material, but some of it may just be a lot of it may just be the generally available material, as opposed to specific briefs for the project. So each project can be very different, and the degree of interaction with the other creators will depend on the individual individual work.
And a lot of what you're doing seems to be character specific. Like, for example, you seem to have taken over Yarrick in a manner of speaking. I don't know if that's precisely true, but like you seem to really tie to that character. Is that true, or is that just the randomness of the moment?
Well, Yarrick is a character who, though he'd had some walk-ons in some other fiction or brief roles, prior to Chains of Golgotha, there hadn't been any individual work solely about him, except for a short story called Survivor, which was Yarrick as a small child. But with an adult, there hadn't been anything except for brief appearances. So the stuff I did with him was the first Yarrick-centered books. So that gave me a certain degree of free rein in the creation of the character. Again, though, trying to keeping true to the character as described in the codexes, in the rule books, essentially, for the game. And in fact, Chains of Golgotha was the events there are described in a single sentence in the timeline of the universe of the core rule book, and so there it was me expanding that to novella length. In the case of Imperial Creed, that was a kind of origin story for Yarrick, and there I had a greater degree of freedom because there really wasn't anything about that particular, apart from a few fragments here and there, as to what his earlier career was like. And it's true that there are certain writers will tend to focus on particular characters. There's some continuity there, but it's not a hard and fast rule either. So there will be. Nick Kime is the salamander guy, right? As well as being one of my editors. And so he has he's done this wonderful series of books about the Space Marines called the Salamanders. But one of the first assignments he gave me after the death of Antagonist was writing a novella about salamanders that then became part of Overfiend. And so there, I was writing about my own particular group of salamanders, but wanting it to be very true to what he had been establishing with his series.
So just to go back to Yarrick for a second. So what in that one sentence sort of attracted you to the character, or I guess you also would have read the story in that case probably. But like, what attracted you to that character, and what when you're kind of mining through this material, thinking of, where is there a story?
Yeah.
Because there's so much of this existing material. I would imagine in some weird way, like the problem might be less, I've got where's the idea, but how do I narrow it down? Like of all this material, where's the thing I want to latch on to when you're actually pitching a story to them? Because it sounds like you would also be approached to do stories, and as you say, you're pitching story concepts and material to them. It seems to me like you're doing a combination of that, and so I guess when you are pitching material, or even when you're assessing, something that's kind of you're being approached with, what is it in there that attracts you, or that kind of makes the case for you?
Well, it depends a lot on the circumstances. In the case of Yarrick, so I was approached by Nick to write the Yarrick books, and And so we had a Skype meeting talking about what directions we might take and what the first one would be. And since that was going to be of novella length, it had to be an incident that was relatively contained. And so I think in fact it was his suggestion to look at the events on Golgotha. But I had long been fascinated by the entry in the timeline in the rule book reads as in this way: Commissar Yarrick and Warlord Ghazghul finally come to face on the battlefields of Golgotha. Yarrick is captured, but ultimately released by Ghazghul, who's the kind of mega orc, as the Warlord is planning to invade Armageddon once more and wants a good fight. And so was fascinated by that entry and wondering, well, what's the story here? At that point, never imagining that I would get to write that story. So that was a contained one, and I'd already been wondering, well, what is the background here? So what being able to flesh that out was a wonderful opportunity. And in the case of that, there's also in the various books, there's all sorts of references to the events on Golgotha, so that I could latch onto this detail, that detail. Oh, his tank, the Fortress of Arrogance, first shows up here, so I can bring that in. In other cases, there's been some other instances where I've been approached for a particular project where I might be given something very close to a full outline, or at least a paragraph saying, okay, this is everything that needs to happen in this story. So that gives me a framework to start with. But in other instances, it might just be, we need a story about this person. And it can be, whatever, just be about that. And so, in the case of Imperial Creed, there I had a free hand to come up with the Yarrick adventure there. In the case of the forthcoming Yarrick novel, The Pyres of Armageddon, this is one of the epic battles of Warhammer 40,000 lore. There were lots of details I was able to draw on as far as the major events of that book are concerned.
And are those details a help or a hindrance? Like, to what degree is the existing material, like, to what degree do you want stuff that has all these gaps? And to what degree is something that's more filled in or fleshed out helpful?
I think they're both fine. They invite different ways to play. So on the one hand, if it's just this character and whatever you want to do, so you're free to come up with anything you like. And that's fun. But the other is the way a further case of how I think of tie-in fiction in general. It's the difference between a sandbox that is just a sandbox or a sandbox that has a whole bunch of toys in it. Right, and it's not that the empty sandbox is impoverished or that the one with the toys is cluttered. I think viewing either in that way would be a mistake. Rather, it's like, oh, these are the wonderful toys I can play with. Here's the structure that I can build on. Or, all right, now I have a blank page to construct what I want. So it's I think the important thing is to love what you are writing and to find the excitement in it, and seeing either option as the means you have in this particular instance to get excited about the work.
And are you also, just you personally, are you also looking for opportunities for horror? Because I know that, as a, not just a horror, fan and horror writer, but as a academic, you're very interested in this idea of horror as a thing that is not a genre per se, but as almost a parasite on genres. And I do sort of see you in your work, especially in particular books like The Damnation of Pythos, really going full bore towards kind of a horror story structure or a horror. Many of the tones and tropes, in a sense. And you do have a world where there are demons. There is this chaos behind everything. I mean, it's very much the great god Pan and that kind of veil with the chaos behind it when you start getting into descriptions of the warp and so on. So I'm just curious to know, to what degree is that something you're actively thinking about when you're going for this material? Or are you just like the genre, or a thing we might consider a genre, like, or not, like horror, does that sort of tonal approach important to you and try to select projects in here, or is it just something you're just doing regardless?
Well, I naturally gravitate that way, since I guess I feel myself to be, I mean, horror. I'm a horror writer probably first. That's certainly what my formation has been, and so I skew dark that way. But this is one of the things that attracted me to Warhammer 40,000 in the first place. It's this kind of one-stop shopping collision of all of my favorite genres in one place. So it's got the SF, it's got the horror, it has the war. It's everything, so there's a lot of different tones I can play with in the works. But yeah, I do tend to move towards horror. The Damnation of Pythos is certainly the most full-on horror novel I've written for them, but also these are this is hardly a secret to my editors either, and so I get lots of projects sent my way that are a good fit for me as a writer. It's like, okay, here, go nuts on the horror here, do your thing. So it's again, it's not so much seeking out a particular project for that, but seeing, in many of the cases, the stuff I'm asked to work on, I can see the horror potential in there, and so I remember on a couple of occasions saying, "Oh, gee, am I pushing this too far?" and then getting feedback, "Go further." So it was like, okay, here I go. So yeah, it's again, it's not a question of me having to try to find it. There's been, I think, a really good mix of. I feel that I'm being invited to do the projects that I'm. How should I say? I have a predisposition for in the first place.
Great. And can you talk a bit about like the process of how these books develop? So, you got some sort of pitch either from them to you or you to them. You've got, I guess an acceptance, or a kind of the ball starts to roll, this thing gets greenlit. How is it kind of staged towards a novel? Like you're doing various outlines and treatments that are approved by the editors before you begin writing, or are you is that correct?
Yeah, again, it'll depend on the project, okay. But in broad terms, there will be a sense of, okay, we'd like you to do X now, and if we're talking about a novel, so then my job is to put together the pitch for Project X, and that will be a chapter by chapter breakdown. Okay. And so then we go back and forth until the outline is looking good, at which point the commission happens, and then I write the book.
So is that something? Would that document be something akin to a film treatment, like that kind of chapter by chapter breakdown? Like how long would it be? What, just in a general sense, or is there a general case?
It's in the case of a novel, it would probably be a couple of thousand words. Sure. It's honestly the outlines that the chapter by chapter breakdowns that I do for them are not that different from what I would do for an original novel. So that I map out what's going to happen in every one of the chapters, and then I know where I'm going, and as with novels, I mean. Original work, there's going to be some changes that will happen, right? That once you, they're not going to be so radical that the planet is not going to blow up at the end of, but you discover that certain things that will go better as you go along. But at least the outlines that I do for them are at least feel to me like the kind of standard chapter by chapter outline I would do for any novel.
And maybe this is a good time for a slight kind of digression. Like, could you talk a little bit about outlining a novel? And did you always do that? To what degree do you feel that's integral to your process? Because you do have, writers that do it, writers that don't do it. I've started gravitating more towards working from outlines and so on, for a variety of reasons. But I'm wondering if that's something you've always done, or something that you really started doing in earnest when necessary.
It wasn't something I used to do. I used to resist the idea of the outline. I thought it would be constricting and smother my dream or whatever. The first 4 novels that I wrote, which would be 3 trunk novels and Crownfire, were essentially pantsed. They had little to no outlining done. The later stages of Crownfire, I started to outline more. As I was sort of juggling all of the plot threads and realizing, I need to know where this is going. I can't just be making this up as I go along. After Crownfire is where the big shift happens. From Cornucopia onwards, I've outlined, and I feel like one of these the former smoker who becomes the proselytizing and non-smoker. I would never go back. I absolutely swear by outlining now. My younger self was wrong. I want to go back and tell him that you're an idiot. It doesn't constrain you. It's not a limitation on your imagination. It gives you the structure so you know where you're going, and if you need to change it, you change it. The process I use is a variation of what Sid Field describes in his screenwriters workbook, and I think it was Stephen R. George who put me on to this method, and it has worked like a dream. I noticed one of the differences, for instance, between Crownfire and Cornucopia, and though I hope that some of the changes here was simply that I was getting better as a writer, but the fact remains that the first novel, which did not have an outline, in the editing process lost a third of its length. Close to 50,000 words were cut. Whereas the outlined Cornucopia, the final draft is pretty close to what the first draft was that I turned in. The editing was a snap compared to what I had to go through with Crownfire. So I think that experience certainly served me in good stead, so that with tie-in fiction, it has to be outlined, right? You have to turn in something so the editors know what the book is that you're going to be turning in. It's necessary, and so that was something that I was already doing. Right, it already felt completely natural to me to do that. I wouldn't want to get started on a novel now that I hadn't already fully outlined. I actually really enjoy the process now.
And can you maybe talk about why it's necessary? Because on one level, I understand, of course, they are shepherding this flock of writers, and the stories have to kind of connect sometimes they have to go in certain places. I mean, there is a vision that in many respects is the editor's vision, insofar as how all the parts are connecting. But there's also, from what I understand, just pure simple practical matters. They're going to have some guy designing this cover while you're writing this book. From what I understand, there's a machine rolling, and if the writer starts screwing up the machine, it could cause all sorts of chaos.
Well, yeah,
is that true, or is that not?
Well, I think perhaps in broad terms, definitely the project, the thing that you're working on has to be approved, right?
Yeah.
This is the story that we need in this particular context, on this particular subject, featuring these particular characters.
By this day.
Yeah, by this day.
Yeah.
And because sometimes those books are going to be tied into specific releases. So what what is the story you're going to be telling? We that has to be established so that when we give you the green light to tell this story, we know that the story you're telling makes sense, that it is the right fit for this character, that you have the right feel for this character, that you're writing about the Blood Angels. They aren't going to have helium balloons showing up at some point, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating for effect, but the editors have to know that you know what you're talking about. And that's on top of if this is tied into a specific release or in a series, does the story work, right? Are you hitting the beats that are needed? So once again, it'll vary from project to project. Also, it may not be a case of is it going to connect well with what we are establishing here, but most fundamentally of all, is it a good story? Mm-hmm. Right? Is this something that is going to make for a good book? Oh, look, one of the things that I think it was with when I was working on Mephiston, the first outline I turned in was really, it wasn't that good. I hadn't. I wasn't giving him an epic enough story, right? And I had the feel for the kind of tale it should be all wrong. I needed to go a lot bigger. So I went back to the drawing board and came up with another idea, and which turned out to be much better and was also a much more fun story for me to work on. In other cases, I had something else fairly recently where the outline wasn't. It wasn't too bad necessarily, but I had some events going on there which are kind of similar to what somebody else had already done fairly recently. So, okay, let's change that around. But again, that fundamental is this good, right? Is this going to be an exciting story for the readers? And I have turned in some outlines that in the early stages, the stuff there that needs fixing, and I've been very, very grateful, very fortunate for the feedback I've had from the editors to turn these into stories that are going to work. And certainly, if whatever issues there might be, if the stories aren't working, then that's entirely my fault, because the feedback that I got has invariably been terrific.
I've become a real convert to outlining, not just for stories, but also for book length project to some poetry and so on. Just because, to me, when I start editing other people's work, one of the first things I do is just make an outline of what they've already produced, and you can always spot problems. Always spot the narrative mistakes. You see when something isn't escalating properly or at all. I mean, I find that most serious problems are structural problems. Once a writer is beyond the position of being able, to write well, right? And for my own work, what I started doing heavily was, after doing first drafts, I would just make an outline of the draft I'd produced, and I would spot so many issues, and I would fix so many problems before I could begin a second draft. It does, I think, in a way, free you up to really even experiment and play around more.
Yeah.
And not just with the structure, but also on like a sentence by sentence level, because one, you can kind of, complicate the structure as you're doing some outlining. And two, you can, when you've got that sort of structure in place, you've got so much flexibility now and to mess around inside of it, knowing that the structure will hold. And that, as crazy as you might be on the ground level here, the cathedral will stand because I put a foundation underneath it, and so on and so forth. And it has, enough walls, and, it is, I think, I like you, I used to see it as very restrictive, and now I see it as a very freeing thing that has really allowed me to do more complicated structures, and I think be producing better and better work. Sorry.
I was going to say, it's like a roadmap. You can't get lost now. You always know where you're going. I find that the issues of getting blocked are much rarer, or at least much smaller. You know that this is going to happen in this chapter, right? You may have to work out a few details on exactly how we get to this particular scene, but there's no more writing myself into a corner and it's like, oh man, and now what?
And you can work out of order, which, I don't know if you necessarily do that, but like I really found like I can work non-linearly in a way that is, so if I just don't want to write the next scene I should write, well, I'll write a later scene, and that's such a simple thing to do as a writer. But, there are those days where, you just are exhausted and you feel sick and you feel stupid. And well, I do know, there's this thing coming up and I could really push on that. It'll be relatively easy to write. The thing in front of me is hard. Well, I don't have to like give up today because today's too hard for me. I could do something else. I mean, I just think there's flexibility in so many respects, even down to the nitty gritty of, what am I going to do in the next hour? Now it's more flexible because I have, this roadmap, as you say, this plan. I could even take a detour if I want to test something out. And understanding that, of course, there's no need to incorporate it back into the structure. It could be a test. I'll do a lot of tests, which I think is something I don't see a lot of writers doing, except unconsciously when they have no outlines. So yeah, one of these days we should have like a long outline discussion. But I want to kind of jump back to this metaphor of the sandbox. I really feel like one of the things that is interesting about tie-in fiction is how it does have a certain connection to non-tie-in fiction, in the sense that regardless, you're in a sandbox that other people have played in. So if you're writing a science fiction novel, for Star Wars, or if you're writing a science fiction novel, for yourself, I mean, you have this. There are other people there. You didn't invent science fiction, and therefore, there's a tradition of literary history to be dealt with. There are toys there already. The haunted house is not your invention, but you can write Gethsemane Hall, which is your invention, and you can, and to me, it's an interesting. It's analogous in certain ways, although I think it's not seen as that. But there's maybe a clear parallel insofar as these, like in Lovecraft, for example, and people playing in the Lovecraft mythos. Like, to what degree do you see the sort of shared universe collaborations that happen in, the kind of work that you're doing, or in similar, kind of tie-in fiction fields? To what degree do you see them as having meaningful parallels to the kind of shared universe work with Lovecraft and, some of his peers that he would co-write with and shadow write for and so on? How do you just feel it relates generally to other fiction cultures, I guess is kind of the broader question.
Well, the funny thing is, when I was submitting my my initial pitch for Black Library, and was trying to establish, apart from the sample that I submitted of the story that I wanted to write, but trying to say, hey, look, you should take me seriously, get me to do this. What I gave as an example of I can do this tie-in fiction stuff was that I'd written a Cthulhu Mythos story, which was really the only thing I had in my my track record or my bibliography that seemed relevant in that regard. So yeah, I mean there are. Well, all work is intertextual, right? Yeah. And the thing with tie-in fiction is that it is very explicitly intertextual, and that is that is foregrounded in its nature. But it also, I mean, which doesn't mean that it is therefore hived off from other literature. So what's been one of the things that I think several of us have fun with in the writing for Warhammer 40,000 or the Horus Heresy is the other references that will start to come in. So Graham McNeil has all kinds of stuff with William Blake showing up in his novel Fulgrim. Dan Abnett in Horus Rising was at one point as the character Horus, uttering lines like, Father, why have you forsaken me, or take this cup from me. So we have this character who is simultaneous in the mythological construction of the Horus Heresy has got the kind of Judas Satan role in that mythology, but speaking Christ's dialogue there. So the intertextual knot that Abnett creates there is quite an interestingly layered one. And so I think so all of those influences are going to have a part. Now, the connections between the two, between that and playing in shared universes, or however we define them, or in established traditions, I think, there is a continuity there. The obvious difference being that there has to be there is a greater degree of control over what's being done. Though I think certainly there'd be other similarities to be established between the Italian prose fiction and the comic book industry, for example, where again you have different writers working with previously established characters, or picking up threads that other people have written.
And to what degree do you see it as having some relationship, or any meaningful relationship, to the sort of fan fiction cultures that exist?
That's a really good question. It's certainly something that I've certainly kicked around in my head in some idle moments. I mean, I think the idea of working with previously established characters. I mean, there's that obvious link there, but I'm not sufficiently familiar with fan fiction to really, I think, talk about that with any authority. Partly, and it's partly sort of deliberate, that given the sort of connections that exist, I've found it, I think, advisable to stay away. To not venture into that world at all.
Sure.
And so I think it's necessary for me to do so.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you think about the possible legal minefield that could become, and so on. Do you think, just kind of looking again more at this idea that you're working in this field, and you're working in, let's say, your own field of writing your books that you're sort of independently going to different places for, like, so you're going to do sequels to Gethsemane Hall, in a manner of speaking, for example. Do you feel like there's going to be like any real crossover from your Warhammer fan base to your broader or maybe less broad fan base? Like, since you haven't put out another book since you started Warhammer fan fiction, or not fan fiction, Warhammer tie-in fiction, it's kind of an academic question, because of course you haven't seen the crossover necessarily, I don't think. Or maybe you have. Well,
I mean, beyond the anecdotal, I wouldn't know. I do know some. I have heard from some readers who encountered me first as a writer of Warhammer 40,000 fiction, who subsequently read Gethsemane Hall. Or have picked up some of the short stories I've done since. So again, it's anecdotal. In terms of figures, I wouldn't begin to know.
I remember when I was reading Dragonlance books and Forgotten Realms and so on. I remember following writers. Like, I don't know if it was common, and then again, I would be a bad example, maybe, like, as somebody who is on their way to becoming a writer, but I would notice who wrote the books. I would follow who wrote the books, like R.A. Salvatore. I would follow. I would actually only read the Forgotten Realms books that he had written, and I encountered him somewhere in Dragonlance or some other. I forget where I encountered him precisely originally.
That would be the Forgotten Realms books. That's where he and his that's where he became really known for. I don't know if he wrote any of the actual Dragonlance series.
I don't know, but I know that
Forgotten Realms is that's where you'd find the bulk of his work.
Yeah, and I remember following particular writers. There were just so many books. It's hard to kind of not you had to whittle it down somehow. And
Yeah.
I found like I would follow certain writers, and other times I'd follow certain characters, right? And then it just you'd accidentally sort of stumble across different writers. But I think it was an interesting. I remember reading Ninja Gaiden books at one point. Nintendo was putting out like these. At least they put out one Ninja Gaiden book. I remember reading the Star Wars sequels to the movies, that like the Star Wars Book 7 or Episode 7 or whatever that had come out. But at that time, it was stigmatized. Like this time fiction was very much stigmatized as something that quote unquote serious authors wouldn't do. I don't know if that stigma still exists. I don't believe it does, but I'm wondering, do you feel like there's any sort of holdover of this sort of stigmatization, or has it just kind of become in a kind of more postmodern culture, has that distinction gone away?
Yeah. That's another one that I've wrestled with. I think there is some, perhaps, the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers was formed. One of its goals is to combat that kind of stigmatization.
Are you a member?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to say,
proudly so. I don't. I can sort of maybe speak to sort of anecdotal perceptions. I do see a lot of writers going back and forth between the two. So I think there's probably much less of a stigma. It's certainly not one that I have. I want to be careful. Just because I haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Or perhaps it's one that that I reject, and that I am very proud to be a tie-in writer. I know that there's certainly there is a perception out there of kind of looking down on it. It does exist in the same way that all genre fiction to greater or lesser degrees is stigmatized. Perhaps say crime fiction, the least of genre fictions to be so dismissed, whereas horror and romance particularly get a lot of stick. And so, tie-in fiction does get that as well. Having said that, I remember someone once telling me when I sort of proudly announced that I was going to be writing Warhammer 40,000 stuff, saying, "Oh well, I guess you get what you take what you can get," I think was the response I got. And it's like, yeah, I'll take it and be happy about it. No. Yeah. So it. I guess it's a question of where the perception exists, where it's coming from, and to what degree you're going to take it seriously or not.
Yeah, or as you say, where it exists, and does it even matter? Like, are the people with the perception people anyone would care about for any meaningful reason? Like, in the sense of is it going to matter to someone's career? Yeah. I can't imagine it could hurt someone's career at this point in history. Although I know that I don't see people writing with pseudonyms. They're tie-in fiction, but again, maybe I wouldn't know.
Well, yeah.
So, I think Kingsley Amis did a tie-in book, did he not?
He wrote a James Bond novel.
Yes, yeah. So, there is a grand tradition of it in many respects.
There is. It's, my entire academic and writing life has been reveling in the genres or the fields that at least from some perspectives are looked down upon, right? Horror being the case in point, and and I delight in that. If this is looked down on, oh well, tell me some more about it, please. It's probably something I should look into, because there's probably something a lot more interesting going on there than this particular attitude suggests there would be. And is there a stigma? Yeah, to a degree there, I'm sure there is. Is it lesser than it was? I think it has been, and I think it's no more justified now than it was then.
Well, I absolutely agree, and thanks so much, David. I don't want to keep you too long today, because I know you've got to start writing another book. I'm sure you've got 5 more on the go. Every time I talk to you, you've got a new book done. It seems, but great books. I mean, I don't know anything about Warhammer 40,000 except for reading some of these books, which are great. My friend of mine was really trying to get me into it, but I was afraid to get into it because of the amount of money I could see myself spending. Because you can buy 2 cool toys, and cool toys.
Very, very cool toys. Yeah.
Me and my money will soon be parted by these cool toys, but the books are more affordable, and the Damnation of Pythos, particularly. It was a great read in this sense that I kept wondering where you could go. How can you escalate from this point? But it kept escalating, and very impressively so. And you've got this amazing sort of nightmare cathedral of cells. I don't want to say too much about it, but it's this brilliant, some brilliant, strange things in there. And I could see you even working certain Deleuzian concepts, under the radar there. It was very clever. And I would definitely recommend Damnation of Pythos to anyone, as well as, these other Warhammer 40,000 books. I mean, even if you don't care about Warhammer 40,000, as frankly I don't, they're great books, and the backstory of the Warhammer 40,000 is really fascinating. I've been reading the Wikias and stuff. Storyline is amazing.
It's incredibly rich lore that they have for the series. It really is.
And literally, 40,000 years of history that of rich lore to play around in. So I really. Tremendous sandbox in its sort of scope and scale. And as you say, really with all of these different genres crashed into one another, from orcs to demons to, space marines. I mean, it's really a fascinating chaos, that blend of nightmare.
Yeah.
Really, really enjoying it.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks very much for talking to me, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. I guess I'll add that. So the next book, probably by the time this is out, is Yarrick, the Pyres of Armageddon. That should be out by late August. And people can find me on Twitter at David_Annandale, or on my website, which is davidannandale.com.
Yeah, and 2 other great intros to the David Annandale Warhammer books are the 2 character-based novellas, like that Yar Chains of Golgotha that you mentioned, and Mephisto and Lord of Death. I mean, I really enjoy those books as again, really great character-focused reads that have and of course the Yarrick has become this real fascinating figure. So I'm really excited to see a new Yarrick book too.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Bye.
Dave. So thanks again to David Annandale. One thing I forgot to mention in the intro is that there's this great book, an anthology called The Shadow of Reporters in Maine. And Annandale is in that anthology. He's got a story in it, which, also, as I mentioned previously, kind of takes a Deleuzian Guattari concept and kind of wraps, a horror story, haunting story around it. So that's in there. And he wrote the epilogue for that anthology. Now, I wrote the introduction for the anthology, and then I also have a short story in it as well, under the name Richard Crow. So my pseudonym, my horror author pseudonym, Richard Crow. And the book is edited by Keith Cadieux, one of my former guests, and Dustin Gearhart. So I recommend The Shadow of Reporters in Maine if you want, to read one of my stories and also read one of David Annandale's stories. Otherwise, of course, check out those books that I mentioned, or some of the other 800 books that David has published. Hope you enjoyed this episode. The show notes are at jonathanball.com/11. So again, that's jonathanball.com/11. Thanks very much. And if you want to be a productive monster like David, I don't know all the secrets to doing that. I guess you kind of have to be some sort of mad, psycho killer focus level author, which, I suppose David is. This guy is also, by the way, holding a full-time job down. So I literally don't know how he does it. Because he also watches movies and things. Like, he's hanging out, having fun. So if you want to get closer to the ideal productivity machine that is David Annandale, you could do, first thing you got to do is get a writing schedule going. So I can help you with that. Go to jonathanball.com/schedule. You'll get a whole article about why you should have a writing schedule. You can read it, or you can just ignore it and start a writing schedule. Sign up for the newsletter that you can sign up for there, and it'll give you some tips, a little ebook for free. It's got some tips about how you can create and maintain a writing schedule. You need to create it, but you also need to maintain it. And that's the hardest thing in many respects. Anybody can get started on a schedule, but how do you keep going on the schedule? So jonathanball.com/schedule. Check that out. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week, and keep writing the wrong way.